Picture this. You are a stranger in a strange land, an ocean away from everything you have ever known. The language feels like a wall of stone, each word a heavy, unfamiliar block you cannot lift. The man who promised you a future, a life of safety and prosperity, reveals himself to be a jailer, his gilded mansion a beautiful cage. His words, once sweet with promise, are now sharp with ridicule, mocking the very accent that marks you as an outsider. Outside his polished windows, the sky turns a bruised and heavy gray. A storm is coming, a blizzard that threatens to bury the world in white. And you are faced with a choice. Do you remain the prisoner in the warm, elegant house, enduring the cruelty of a man who sees you as a possession? Or do you flee into the teeth of the coming storm, gambling your life on the hope that the unforgiving wilderness of Montana might show you a mercy he never will? For Anya Petrova, this was not a picture. It was the chilling reality of her new life. She stood in the grand foyer of Mayor Richard Thompson's estate, a crystal glass of untouched champagne sweating in her hand. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree and the smug laughter of Thompson's powerful friends. He had just made a joke at her expense, mimicking her thick Russian accent as she tried to ask a simple question about the food. The room had roared, and Anya felt a familiar, hot shame creep up her neck. Her English was a clumsy tool, and here it was a weapon used against her. Thompson, a man whose public face was one of benevolent leadership, was a tyrant in private. He laid a proprietary hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging in just enough to remind her of his control. "My dear Anya is still learning our ways," he said to the room, his smile a cold, polished thing. "But she is beautiful, is she not? A perfect ornament for our little town. An ornament, possession, not a person." That night, after the guests had departed, his anger flared. An expensive vase was shattered against the wall because she had not smiled enough, had not played the part of the adoring fiancée with sufficient enthusiasm. "You will learn respect," he'd snarled, his voice a low hiss. "You are mine. I paid for you, and you will learn your place." He locked her in her bedroom, the click of the bolt echoing the final closing of her cage door. Through the window, she watched the first snowflakes begin to drift down from the iron-colored sky. They were gentle at first, then thicker, faster, a gathering legion of white. It was now or never. The storm was her only chance. With trembling hands, she pulled a small, worn bag from beneath the bed, stuffing into it the few things that were truly hers. A faded photograph of her parents, a warm woolen scarf her grandmother had knitted, and the last of her meager savings. She pulled on a thick coat, a gift from Thompson she now saw as nothing more than a costume, and slipped out the second-story window, landing softly in a snow-covered hedge. The cold was a physical blow, a shock that stole her breath, but it was the clean, sharp breath of freedom. She didn't look back. She ran, her boots sinking into the rapidly deepening snow, and disappeared into the swirling, roaring white of the Montana blizzard. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of wind and ice. Every direction looked the same, a blinding, featureless expanse of white. Anya's hope began to freeze along with her limbs. The grand escape had become a desperate, stumbling prayer for survival. The wind howled like a starving wolf, tearing at her coat, its icy teeth biting at any exposed skin. Her thoughts grew sluggish, her memories of Thompson's cruelty the only thing keeping the fire of her will from being extinguished completely. She fell, her body too numb to even feel the impact, and as she lay in the snowdrift, her eyes stared sightless at the burning sky. This was it. This was the end. But through the roar of the storm, she heard a new sound, a rhythmic, heavy crunching. A shape emerged from the blinding chaos, a ghost on horseback, mythic and terrifying. The figure dismounted, a tall man wrapped in furs, a scar running like a frozen river from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, pulling his expression into a permanent, grim set. He knelt beside her, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, assessing her with a stark and serious calm. He said nothing. He simply gathered her limp form into his arms, the rough texture of his coat scratching her cheek, and lifted her onto his horse. The last thing she remembered was the steady, solid beat of his heart against her ear, a rhythm of life in the midst of a world of white death. She awoke to the smell of wood smoke and brewing coffee. She was in a small, rustic cabin, tucked into a bed under a mountain of heavy quilts. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow across the log walls. The man sat in a chair by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. He looked up when he heard her stir, his expression unreadable. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Anya's exhausted haze. Had she merely traded one cage for another? He saw the terror in her eyes. He put the knife down and stood, moving not toward her, but to the stove. He poured coffee into a tin mug and brought it over, placing it on the small table beside the bed. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, slow and careful. "You, safe." Here he pointed to himself. "Elias," he then pointed to her. Anya hesitated, then whispered her own name. "Anya," he nodded once, a gesture of simple acknowledgement, and returned to his chair. There was no mockery in his gaze, no impatience. He was a man carved from the silence of the mountains, his solitude a palpable presence in the room. The blizzard raged for 3 days, sealing the cabin off from the world. It became their sanctuary. In this small, warm space, a new language was born between them, one of gestures, simple words, and shared silence. Elias never pushed her to speak, but when she tried, he listened with a deep, unwavering patience that shamed the memory of Thompson's ridicule. He would point to objects, table, fire, bread, and she would repeat the words, her accent thick but her voice growing stronger with each attempt. He taught her the names of the animals whose pelts adorned the walls, and she, in turn, showed him the photograph of her parents, pointing to the snow-covered dacha behind them. "Siberia," she said. "My home. Much snow." Like this, he looked at the picture for a long time, then at her, a flicker of understanding in his stoic eyes. She learned of his own sorrow not through words, but through the things he kept. A small, worn rocking horse in the corner. A faded photograph on the mantle of a smiling woman and a young boy, their faces frozen in a summer long past. He had lost his family in a fever that swept through the valley years ago. This cabin was not just his home. It was his memorial, his fortress against a world that had taken everything from him. In his quiet, respectful presence, Anya began to heal. The fear that had lived in her bones for months began to thaw. She cooked for him, simple, hearty stews that filled the cabin with warmth. She mended a tear in his coat, her stitches neat and strong. They were two solitary souls, trapped by a storm, who were slowly, silently, building a shelter for each other. On the 4th morning, the world was born anew. The wind had died, and the sun shone with a brilliant, blinding light on a landscape sculpted from diamonds. The beauty of it was breathtaking, but it brought with it a new and terrible danger. The end of the storm meant the search could begin. Elias stood at the window, his body tense. Far down the valley, a group of dark figures on horseback was moving steadily toward them. "Thompson," he said, the name a curse on his lips. Anya's blood ran cold. The mayor, enraged by her defiance and flight, was coming to reclaim his property. Elias checked his rifle, his jaw set in a hard line. "They will not take you," he stated, a simple, unbreakable vow. But Anya could see there were at least 5 of them. Elias was one man, a brave man, but only one. As fear threatened to paralyze her, a change began to occur in the air. The brilliant sun dimmed. The wind, which had been so still, began to whisper again, then moan, then shriek. The blizzard was returning. A second wave, a true whiteout, more ferocious and sudden than the first. Visibility dropped to nothing in a matter of moments. Elias stared into the swirling vortex, his knowledge of the land rendered useless. "I can't see 5 feet in front of me," he muttered, frustration and worry etched onto his face. But Anya felt a strange calm settle over her. This she knew. This was the language of her childhood. This was the Siberian Porga, the blinding blizzard that could swallow a man whole if he did not know how to listen. "I know this," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the howl of the wind. Elias turned to look at her, seeing not the frightened refugee he had rescued, but a woman of profound and unexpected strength. "In my home," she explained, her English coming more easily now, fueled by adrenaline and purpose. "We learn the storm, the sound, the snow. It speaks." She pulled her scarf tight around her face. "They are lost now, blind. But we are not." For the first time, she was the leader, the protector. She taught Elias to close his eyes and feel the direction of the finest, sharpest ice crystals on his cheek to find the true wind. She showed him how the drifts formed, their shape telling the story of the terrain hidden beneath. They moved out of the cabin, not as fugitives, but as hunters, using the storm as their cloak. Thompson and his men were shouting, their voices thin and desperate against the roaring wind, terrifyingly close but completely disoriented. Following Anya's lead, they circled the lost party. She picked up a heavy branch and struck it against a rock outcropping, the sharp crack echoing in a way that suggested a cliff's edge. The men yelled and veered away, deeper into a thicket of tangled woods. Elias watched her, his heart filled with a raw, powerful awe. This woman, mocked for her tongue, was now speaking the language of survival more fluently than anyone he had ever known. She had transformed the monster that had come to devour them into their greatest weapon. Thompson, maddened with rage, fired his pistol blindly into the white void, but the sound was swallowed whole. Defeated, freezing, and with one of his men now injured from a fall, they were forced into a humiliating retreat, their power utterly broken by a force of nature they could not intimidate and a woman they had so foolishly underestimated. When the sun finally rose on a clear and peaceful world, the silence it left behind was absolute. The snow was a pristine blanket, covering all the scars of the land and, it seemed, of their lives. Thompson and his men were gone, their failed expedition becoming a story of hubris and incompetence that would quickly erode the mayor's authority in the town he once ruled. Elias and Anya stood on the small porch of the cabin, the cold air clean and sharp in their lungs. He turned to her, his gaze stripped of all its earlier stoicism, replaced by a deep and profound reverence. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not me. You." Anya looked out at the vast, white expanse, a landscape that was no longer terrifying, but beautiful. It was a blank page on which a new story could be written. She met his eyes, a small, confident smile touching her lips for the first time. "We save us," she corrected gently. Together, the cabin was no longer his fortress of grief or her temporary refuge. It was home. In the heart of the storm, they had not just found safety. They had found each other. They had become a family, forged not by blood, but by the fire of a shared trial and the quiet strength of mutual respect. What does it truly mean to be understood? Is it the perfection of grammar and the absence of an accent? Or is it something deeper? A connection that transcends words, found in a moment of shared vulnerability and courage? Anya came to America searching for a promise, only to find a nightmare. But in the crucible of a Montana whiteout, she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, and a man who didn't need perfect English to hear the truth of her heart. How often do we judge others by the surface, by the way they speak or where they come from, never seeing the immense resilience and wisdom they carry within them? What storms in our own lives are we willing to face to find where we truly belong? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that remind us of the power of the human spirit, don't forget to like and subscribe.